Welcome back, fellow Vikings. I wanted to apologize to you all for the delay in content. We have had a strict burn ban in place here, and most of my crafting requires fire. So in lieu of doing any crafting videos, I've decided to discuss the mystical world that is Norse mythology. In this series, we'll be diving into Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. But before we do, I wanted to cover some topics that will make addressing some of the pagan concepts easier to digest for the listener. First off, what is Norse mythology? It is important to understand that Norse mythology and beliefs and traditions were not formed by itself, but just a branch of a giant evolutionary tree of religion that covered most of continental Europe and dates all the way back to our Indo-European ancestors. Norse mythology is just one particular flavor of a giant group of cultures and stories. Speaking of giant, we need to address the elephant in the room about giants. In much of pop culture relating to Norse mythology that we see today, giants are present. Big, ugly monsters that need to be destroyed by our protagonist. All of the imagery and depictions we have today are actually based on a mistranslation. That mistranslated word is Jotun, or Jotnar in the plural form, and there's nothing in the source text stating that the Jotnar are any different than our heroes. In fact, they often intermarry and have children. They can wield each other's weapons, set foot in another's homes, ride horses together. In fact, all the texts suggest that the Jotnar and the Norse gods are anthropomorphically the same. Not to say that there aren't some giants who are in fact large or larger than normal, but wherever you see the word giant in Norse mythology, be aware that our modern interpretations will not translate over to the source text well. With that in mind, let's get started with Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. Hope you enjoy.
It's as hard to have a favorite sequence of myths as it is to have a favorite style of cooking. But if I had to declare a favorite, it would probably be Norse myths. My first encounter with Asgard and its inhabitants was as a small boy, no more than 7, reading The Adventures of the Mighty Thor, as depicted by American comics artist Jack Kirby. I loved Kirby's blonde, hammer-wielding Thor, and I wanted to learn more about him. I borrowed a copy of Myths of the Norsemen by Roger Lancelyn Green, and read and reread it with delight and puzzlement, as Asgard, in this telling, was no longer a Kirby-esque future city, but was a Viking hall and a collection of buildings out on the frozen wastes. Odin, the Allfather, was no longer gentle, wise, and irascible, but instead was brilliant, unknowable, and dangerous. Thor was just as strong as the mighty Thor in the comics, and Loki was not evil, although he was certainly not good. In addition, I learned the Norse gods came with their own doomsday, Ragnarok, twilight of the gods, the end of it all. The gods were going to battle the frost giants, and they were all going to die. Had Ragnarok happened yet? Was it still to happen? I did not know then, I am not certain now. It was the fact that the world and the story ends, and the way that it ends and is reborn, that made the gods and the frost giants and the rest of them tragic heroes, tragic villains. Ragnarok made the Norse world linger for me, seem strangely present and current, while other, better documented systems of belief felt as if they were part of the past, old things. The Norse myths are the myths of a chilly place, with long, long winter nights and endless summer days. Myths of a people who did not entirely trust or even like their gods, although they respected and feared them. As best we can tell, the gods of Asgard came from Germany, spread into Scandinavia, and then out into parts of the world dominated by the Vikings, to Orkney, Scotland, Ireland, and north of England, where the invaders left places named for Thor or Odin. In English, the gods have left their names in 4 of our days of the week. You can find Tyr, the one-handed, Odin, Thor, and Frigg, the queen of the gods, in respectively Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There are so many Norse stories that we do not have, so much we do not know. All we have are some myths that have come to us in the form of folktales, in retellings, in poems, in prose. They were written down when Christianity had already displaced the worship of the Norse gods, and some of the stories we have came to us because people were concerned that if the stories were not preserved, some of the kennings, the usages of the poets that referred to events in specific myths, would become meaningless. Freya's tears, for example, was a poetic way of saying gold. In some of the tales, the Norse gods are described as men, or as kings or heroes of old, so that the stories could be told in a Christian world. Some stories and poems tell of other stories or imply of other stories that we simply do not have. We have lost so much. I've tried my best to retell these myths and stories as accurately as I can and as interestingly as I can. Sometimes details in the stories contradict each other, but I hope that they paint a picture of a world and a time. As I retold these myths, I tried to imagine myself a long, long time ago, in the lands where these stories were first told, during long winter nights, perhaps under the glow of the northern lights. I was surprised when I finished the stories and read them as a sequence to find that they felt like a journey. From the ice and the fire that the universe begins in, to the fire and the ice that the world ends. Along the way, we meet people like Loki and Thor and Odin, and people we want to know so much more about. I did not go back to the tellers of Norse myth whose work I had loved. I spent my time instead with many different translations of Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, and with verses of the Poetic Edda, words from 900 years ago and before, picking and choosing what tales I wanted to retell, and how I wanted to tell them. Blending versions of myth from the prose and from the poems. My battered copy of A Dictionary of Northern Mythology by Rudolf Simek, translated by Angela Hall, was invaluable, continually consulted, eye-opening, and informative. All mistakes and conclusions jumped to and odd opinions in this volume are mine, and mine alone. I would not wish anyone else blamed for them. I hope I've retold these stories honestly, but there was still joy in creation in telling them. That's the joy of myths. The fun comes in telling them yourself, something I warmly encourage you to do. You person, you reading this. Read the stories in this book, then make them your own, and on some dark and icy winter evenings, or on a summer night, when the sun will not set, tell your friends what happened to Thor's hammer when it was stolen, or how Odin obtained the meat of poetry from the gods. Neil Gaiman, May 2016. Alright, Chapter 1, The Players. Many gods and goddesses are named in Norse mythology. You will meet quite a few of them in these pages. Most of the stories we have, however, concern two gods, Odin and his son Thor, Odin's blood brother Loki, who lives with the Aesir in Asgard. Odin. The highest of all and oldest of all the gods is Odin. Odin knows many secrets. He gave an eye for wisdom. More than that, for knowledge of runes and for power, he sacrificed himself to himself. He hung from the world tree Yggdrasil, hung there for 9 nights. His side was pierced by the point of the spear, which wounded him gravely. The winds clutched at him, buffeted his body as it hung. Nothing did he eat for 9 days or 9 nights. Nothing did he drink.
He was alone there, in pain, the light of his life slowly going out. He was cold, in agony, and on the point of death, when his sacrifice bore dark fruit. In the ecstasy of his agony he looked down, and the runes were revealed to him. He knew them, and understood them and their power. The rope broke them, and he fell, screaming from the tree. Now he understood magic. Now the world was his to control. Odin has many names. He's the All-Father, the Lord of the Slain, the Gallows God. He is the god of cargoes and of prisoners. He is called Grimnir in Third. He has different names in every country, but it is always Odin they worship. He travels from place to place in disguise to see the world as people see it. When he walks among us, he does so as a tall man wearing a cloak and hat. He has 2 ravens, whom he calls Hugin and Munin, which mean thought and memory. These birds fly back and forth across the world, seeking news and bringing Odin all of the knowledge of all things. They perch on his shoulders and whisper into his ears. When he sits on his high throne, he can observe all things, wherever they may be. Nothing can be hidden from him. He brought war into the world. Battles are begun by throwing a spear at a hostile enemy, dedicating the battle and its deaths to Odin. If you survive in battle, it is with Odin's grace, and if you fall, it is because he has betrayed you. If you fall bravely in war, the Valkyries, beautiful battle maidens who collect souls of the noble dead, will take you and bring you to the hall known as Valhalla. He will be waiting for you in Valhalla, and there you will drink and fight and feast and battle, with Odin as your leader.
Thor, Odin's son, is the Thunderer. He is straightforward where his father Odin is cunning, good-natured where his father is devious. Huge he is, and red-bearded, and strong, by far the strongest of all the gods. His might is increased by his belt of strength, Meginjord. When he wears it, his strength is doubled. Thor's weapon is Mjolnir, a remarkable hammer, forged for him by dwarves. It's a story that you will learn. Trolls and Jotnar all tremble when they see Mjolnir, for it has killed so many of their brothers and friends. Thor wears iron gloves, which help him grip the hammer's shaft. Thor's mother was Jord, the earth goddess. Thor's sons are Modi, the angry, and Magni, the strong. Thor's daughter is Thrud, the powerful. His wife is Sif, of the golden hair. She had a son, Ulir, before she married Thor, and Thor is Ulir's stepfather. Ulir is a god who hunts with a bow and arrow, and he is the god with skis. Thor is the defender of Asgard and of Midgard. There are many stories of Thor and his adventures you will encounter here. Loki. Loki is very handsome. He is plausible, convincing, likable, and far away the most wily, subtle, and shrewd of all inhabitants of Asgard. It is a pity, then, that there is so much darkness inside him, so much anger, so much envy, so much lust. Loki is the son of Laufey, who was also known as Null, or Needle, because she was slim and beautiful and sharp. His father was said to be Farbauti, a giant. His name means, he who strikes dangerous blows. Farbauti was as dangerous as his name. Loki walks in the sky with shoes that fly, and he can transform his shape so he looks like other people or change into animal form. But his real weapon is his mind. He is more cunning, subtler, trickier than any god or giant. Not even Odin is as cunning as Loki.
Loki is Odin's blood brother. The other gods do not know when Loki came to Asgard or how. He is Thor's friend and Thor's betrayer. He is tolerated by the gods, perhaps because his stratagems and plans save them just as often as they get them into trouble. Loki makes the world more interesting but less safe. He is the father of monsters, the author of woes, the sly god. Loki drinks too much, and he cannot guard his words or his thoughts or his deeds when he drinks. Loki and his children will be there for Ragnarok, the end of everything, and it will not be on the side of the gods of Asgard that they will fight. And this is where we will pause our introductions for tonight. Stay tuned for Chapter 1, Before, the Beginning, and After, and Chapter 2, Yggdrasil and the Nine Worlds. If you're still craving a Norse fix, let me introduce you to one of my favorite Viking artists, Danheim. I'll leave a link below of his YouTube channel, but here's a quick sample for you. Until next time, see you in Valhalla.